You're looking especially like Ben Davis today with the hat, even more so than normal.
I wanted to look like you, except I wanted to be more of the take a different
More
approach.
grown
I think
up.
two backwards hats on a podcast, that might just be. I don't think anyone's taking a business podcast seriously if they got two backwards hats. One's good enough.
I'm not sure they take it seriously with one backward hat. I'm regretting wearing the backwards hat the second day of the summit. That's been eating away at me for a little while.
Why?
I don't know. I know it's
You're a
like my
hat guy.
brand. I don't know. It didn't look right being up on stage with the backwards hat. I had a lot of some people at the summit came up to me and they're like, I just assumed you were bald because you're always wearing a hat. So
Good
part
point.
of me is like, I just maybe retire the hat, show people I got like so good. I'm not even gonna show it. Keeps the intrigue. But anyway, I enjoy the hat today. Maybe this will be a mainstay for you.
No, probably not. You don't put a cover on a Maserati, and with hair like mine, I'm going to have this until the last follicle falls out. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I always might have to represent the brand better sometimes. So maybe instead of behind me, it has to be on my giant forehead instead. So we have a big logo.
I mean, that big logo fits your forehead better than mine.
It does.
That's why I wear a backwards hat.
Forehead. Strong Irish forehead. Hey, on today's episode, we are joined by Jeremy Goldberg, president and co-founder of LeagueApps and executive board co-chair of FundPlay Foundation, Pete Frintzilas, CEO of TeamSnap, and Jared Cooper, executive director of the FundPlay Foundation. But before we get into that, we want to thank Blackmagic Design for sponsoring the show. Recently, every kick, phase, scrum, and try at this year's Tropical Sevens Youth Rugby Tournament was streamed thanks to Blackmagic Design. That included 250-plus teams and 750-plus matches across 15 fields. That's over 1.2 million square feet, people. And over 4 days of frenetic action streamed live in its entirety at a level not previously seen in the sport. That included the Mini Extreme, the Mini Pro switchers, and converters for multi-camera streaming and their DaVinci Resolve replay and post-production solutions. Everyone who watches youth sports, athletes, parents, and grandparents, coaches, college recruiters has come to expect streaming that looks and sounds professional. And that's what Blackmagic Design can deliver. Just that for your club, event, facility, or school. Their suite of affordable products are the same high quality as those used by professional sports teams and in Hollywood, delivering easy-to-learn multicam streaming that open new revenue streams. For more information, visit blackmagicdesign.com.
I'm wondering if Blackmagic did any of the cameras for the NFL Flag Championships this weekend, and that was a good example of what ESPN, ABC, when they kind of throw their promotional and their production might behind an event. Certainly not as big as the Little League World Series, but I noticed the officials all had cameras on their hats. So I don't know, maybe Blackmagic made those or somebody else. That feels like a huge opportunity as youth sports thinks more about production and more things get on TV or like wide scale streaming like PG.TV. You could put cameras in more places, more places than pro athletes and players associations will allow, right? On the bench, on hats. FIFA obviously did this during the World Cup with the officials. So, omnipresent cameras everywhere. So good to have our sponsor Blackmagic back.
Yeah, NFL Flag. What a
today,
production!
I should say.
What a production they put on this weekend. It was good. I watched from what little I watched. I enjoyed it. Good commentary. Great athleticism, both boys and girls. I think that sport might have a future. What were your thoughts after we just recorded the interview with the gang, with the Strong Kids Act gang?
No, nothing. I'll defer completely to the interview. But I think I'll maybe call out what we talked about at the end is there's been a lot of talk around regulation or legislation in youth sports. And what's being proposed here, the Strong Kids Act, is really just a funding mechanism that could be more immediate than a lengthy regulation process to really kind of improve accessibility and affordability in youth sports. And you have some of the industry's biggest players coming together to get behind a bill that would unlock money that's already going into the federal coffers through the sports betting excise tax, and then redirecting that to nonprofits at the federal, state, and local level for youth sports. So you could do a lot worse, and I think I think there's a lot of good here. So I kind of defer to the interview for the key stakeholders' takes and inputs, but good stuff here. Certainly a different conversation. Not everything's about kind of rules based. It's like, hey, how do we unlock funding? And that's some of the ideas we talk about here.
Yeah, that was a major topic of the entire conversation, unlocking funding, and then we just peeled back a little bit of the layers on the bill, a little bit of the language, and wanted to talk about that a little bit. So, hey, let's get over to that interview. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk to you later. Welcome back to Buying Sandlot. Today, we're joined by Jared Cooper, Executive Director at FundPlay Foundation, Jeremy Goldberg, President of LeagueApps, and Pete Frintzilas, CEO of TeamSnap, to talk about the Strong Kids Act. Jeremy, I'll throw it over to you first to get us started. Can you just describe what FundPlay is, how it was born, and what it's involved into?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the intersection of kind of a couple different threads of work, and I appreciate y'all having us on here and the chance to talk about this along with Peter and with Jared. FundPlay as a foundation really started out a lot of the work that LeagueApps did years ago when we saw an opportunity to kind of impact accessibility through our software and our services. Jared was working at the team at the time, and over years we've been able to really emerge as an intermediary that's trying to help all those organizations out there doing incredible work, especially sports-based youth development organizations. And in parallel to what we were doing with FundPlay, we also were involved in help starting and running a coalition called Play Sports Coalition, which is where Peter and I got to spend a lot of time together. And that coalition really came out of COVID, trying to figure out how to get PPP funding and ways of keeping the industry afloat and really helping the industry kind of navigate what was a really challenging time. And what we saw during that period was there was a chance for us to continue to work together, not just at a time of crisis, but rather how do we bring our voices together, think about policy, think about how to work with government that ultimately can improve access. And through that, and I'm sure Jared, Peter get into that, we were able to have some successes by virtue of being able to drive more resources into the ecosystem. And ultimately, the Play Sports Coalition now is housed within FundPlay Foundation. Jared was actually helping to run both, and so that was an efficient way for us to bring the industry together. But where we sit today now is for FundPlay Foundation really serving as a leading intermediary in the space and really leading a lot of the efforts to build coalitions on youth sports policy at the federal and the state level.
Pete, I'll turn to you for a sec. Play Sports Coalition, obviously very involved in the bill, and we'll get to that specifically in a second. But I'm looking at the two of you guys on my screen, Jeremy and you, Pete, and when people think about youth sports registration platforms, TeamSnap and LeagueApps are among the first two, or in some cases, the only first two that come to mind for most people. Jeremy, I had breakfast with you in the winter and we left. I think you said, I got to go call Pete. And I was like, what? So maybe for the broader audience, talk a little bit about the alignment between, two obviously competing tech platforms and the benefits of aligning on this specific initiative.
Yeah, Kyle, I think it's representative of the entire coalition we've been able to pull together, right? I sitting in my seat as CEO of TeamSnap, Jeremy as, founder, president of LeagueApps. We're in a position where the size, scale, and reach of our organizations is meaningful, right? And we are service providers to this ecosystem. We have the right to provide those services, but at the same time, as I always tell my team, it's our responsibility to also make this community of youth sports better. And so, yes, do I want to win every account and go build the best technology possible and beat LeagueApps and some of the other competitors day in and day out? Of course. And at the same time, we also have the ability to partner for the greater good in order to have a level of influence and impact. And, while the two of us are here on this podcast, it is an organization of nonprofits, a lot of the YMCA, NRPA, and others, along with industry partners, right? Players Health and Triple Crown, and other organizations that have really been at the table with us driving this forward. And as Jeremy said, this is 6 months in our 6 years in the making. We've dual tracked our advocacy efforts between both state and federal, having been successful at a state level and unlocking over $60 million of tax revenue that is now allocated directly into youth sports organizations. But at the same time, dual tracking that at a federal level, right? In 6 years of kind of grinding through the process here in a couple different iterations. And we feel like we're landing in a really compelling and exciting spot.
Just to add a perspective is, it's, while it may seem unusual to some people that competitors are working together, nothing about it has ever felt unusual to Pete and I. And we've been part of the Aspen Institute, which I think has done a really good job of bringing a lot of stakeholders together. We've been trying to figure out how to build on that and then try to take the right kind of actions. And if you think about sports in general, you could have teams competing to try to win a game, but both can step back and say, well, we're part of a larger league, and there's a broader responsibility we have in stewarding that game that I think we take really seriously. And I think if you can look at the environmental movement as an example, you can even look at other examples in sports where people recognize there's something larger than themselves or larger than their company to be part of. And it's very clear to us that we can bring together a lot of different stakeholders to make youth sports better, which is a big part of what we've been after.
Yeah, and this bill's definitely gonna do that. Jared, can you talk about the Strong Kids Act, what it aims to do, the mechanisms by which it aims to do it, and the challenges to going from proposal now to passed?
Yeah, we're excited about this bill. This is something we've been working on for a number of years, looking for ways, as Pete mentioned, both at the state and federal level, to unlock funding from government that could be used to increase access and participation to youth sports. This became an opportunity for us as we were looking at potential revenue sources. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to have additional costs or create a new tax, that this was money that was already coming into the federal government. And so we saw that opportunity with the sports gaming excise tax and thought, well, this is a great opportunity for us to write legislation, find bipartisan leads and sponsors, which we have in Representative Mike Carey and Representative Nanette Diaz-Barragan. They've done a great job of believing in the importance of youth sports from a societal point of view and why more kids need to play, really attaching to this national youth sports strategy of getting 63% participation by 2030. And this is something that we think will put us on the path to do that. And it's all about supporting the great organizations at the grassroots level, ones that are running primarily free or low-cost programs in underserved communities, but are using sport as a vehicle for youth development and providing an opportunity for kids to play at low or no cost. So we're excited about the bill. We can dive into the mechanisms and how it goes from Health and Human Services to grantees at the national and regional level down to the grassroots. Happy to answer all these questions and kind of dig in on it, but we're certainly excited about the fact that it's been introduced. No, it's a long road to go from here to passage, but that's what we're here to do. We want to be action oriented and get something passed, and if that includes having pieces of it moving into other pieces of legislation, whatever it might take, we want action, and we want there to be positive momentum to increase access and participation, and we think this is a great way to get things started.
Maybe briefly summarize. Obviously there will be demand for this. We actually had a couple people respond to the newsletter we sent on Friday asking, hey, how do I access these funds? And our response was, hey, it's a proposed bill, but stay tuned. So maybe just summarize exactly how it works, the amounts at the federal, state, and local levels, and maybe the mechanisms by which operators and nonprofit operators can tap into the funding if passed as proposed.
Sure. So there's a federal sports gaming excise tax. This is a tax that the federal government places on every bet that's placed legally across the country. And that goes into a pool of funds that is estimated to be about $400 million in this past calendar year. We've written this legislation to allocate and appropriate half of that funding, so about $200 million per year, into a youth sports grant program. This would be overseen and operated by Health and Human Services. HHS would run a grant program where they would grant up to $5 million to national nonprofits. Think about organizations like YMCA, National Rec and Park Association, Boys and Girls Clubs, Police Athletic Leagues, After School Alliance, and others. Up to $2.5 million for regional nonprofits or state-based government agencies. And then those organizations would be required to subgrant funds to grassroots nonprofits of up to $50,000, between $10,000 and $50,000 each. Those organizations would be able to use those funds for background checks, for coach training, for equipment and apparel, for field space, rentals, but also refurbishment and renovation where necessary, and ultimately for the operating costs to run these organizations. We've worked with these organizations for many years. The types of organizations that would benefit from this at the grassroots level, they know where their needs are. They're generally quite resource constrained. And we've run other grant programs, not that we would necessarily be the the ones that are administering these grants, but we as FundPlay have done this with Massachusetts. One of the examples that Pete mentioned at the state level, Massachusetts has provided a $250,000 earmark annually that FundPlay Foundation has been able to steward, ran a grant program, identified 17 amazing organizations at the state level, and have been able to provide grants to them. And we've done so in a trust-based way, knowing that they are using these funds in the way that is most meaningful for them. And so certainly we want to make sure from an eligibility and requirement standpoint that that the organizations are using these funds effectively, and we expect that they will, and they'll be reporting back how those funds are used. But we've seen from a trust-based lens that these organizations are very effective at knowing where to allocate their resources to provide the most and best experience for most kids.
Maybe to follow on there, I think we'll open any of the subsequent questions here up to all three of you or some combination. So kind of raise your hand and chime in. I wrote in the newsletter on Friday, like, hey, it seems like by design, there's a pretty wide use case for the funds. Do you guys have like a main KPI? Is it about increasing like sheer increase in participation or increase in quality of participation? So is there a specific metric that maybe those ground level organizations can abide by, in terms of maybe getting follow-on grants or something like that? Have you guys thought about that at all?
One thing, maybe just to take a step back and then to get to that specific question, if you just think about where this comes from, or this idea comes from, I think it starts with the assumption that this is an under-resourced sector, that there's specifically for underserved communities, there's not enough resources that are available to those communities. That could be around the programs, the deliveries, the facilities, the access. There are any number of factors that are at play here, but that ultimately, if you look at the level of investment against the actual impact that sports can have in transforming lives and communities, and you also look where those resources are available, there's just a gap, right? And if you look at countries around the world, where those gaps are typically solved are things like sports gaming, where this is a model that is tried and tested, places like Norway, which you've written about, and others, as a means of funding it. And in fact, what we've been able to see is that across a number of states, they've also embraced this, because you've got to have the money to come from somewhere. So sometimes having a funding mechanism is one of the things that allows you to solve that gap. And then the final question, I think, which you're getting at is, well, how do you figure out how to distribute those dollars? And what I think we've been able to do in the consultation with a lot of the different grant makers, not only the experience we had at FundPlay Foundation, but what Laureus has done, or L84, Play Equity Foundation, and others, is to really understand what's the best way to design the way that those grants are made. What are the expectations you're setting on them, and what are you trying to achieve? And so what Jared was really describing is a model in which you're saying, if these organizations are in the business of delivering these sports, you ultimately want them to both increase the number of kids that have access to that, or also the quality of those experiences in terms of the level of coaching, the impact that has on it, the level of safety, as another example of things that impact that quality. And so, but we want to see more kids playing, and we want to see higher quality experiences, are the two fundamental KPIs. And the way you do that, though, is through more of a trust-based model, which is more and more common in philanthropy, where you're trusting that organization to define it, as long as they can ultimately say, hey, this is ultimately how we're going to get more kids access, but this is ultimately how we're going to make sure we're really improving the depth and the impact and the quality of the experiences that are being offered. But this is not just a made-up strategy, in the sense that this is really, I think, developed, even the Aspen Institute has written a lot about this model that we've been able to take and apply in different settings. Now we're just trying to scale it federally in a way that you see in a lot of other countries around the world.
Go ahead, Pete. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, if the end goal is to allow every kid to have a team and access to a team to show up for, and that if you think about kind of the value chain of sport in order to get there, it does hit many of the different groups that you're talking about here, right? Whether it's play spaces, those are CapEx improvements. We want to be able to fund that. Whether it's the quality of what is happening on the field, both from a quality of coaching perspective, along with the safety perspective, there's areas of opportunity there. And then ultimately, it's the affordability and accessibility. Are there enough programs within a dense area that might be socioeconomically challenged? And do the kids within those areas have the means in which to sign up for those programs in order to be able to join that team? Ultimately, all those getting to the point of kids playing sport, we're developing our youth, the health benefits, the mental benefits, the team camaraderie, and everything else that comes with it.
So yeah, we're kind of reading between the lines from what you guys are saying. It sounds to me like that's probably why the money, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is routed kind of from the federal and state level down to the sub-grantees, because you kind of have that trust piece is kind of sitting in the middle with the larger organizations like YMCA, and they're deciding who it goes down to, not just any small unknown grassroots group coming up and saying, hey, I want 10 grand or something like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. They know how to deploy these funds. They are grant makers, whether it's Laureus and others, kind of in the regional space, or YMCA, NRPA, and others. They know how to deploy these funds. They know how to do so quickly, and report back at a large scale as well. So we think this is an effective model of getting funds from the federal government down to the grassroots.
What about on the facility side? I know it's one of the uses here. We've read a lot about this, wrote about it today, like just from some of the surveys we put out and talking to people. It seems like facility is obviously one of the big cost drivers. And almost paradoxically, a lot of the public funding to facilities today goes to the larger tournament venues, and it's kind of built around the tourism impact economics, which is great, but in some ways it actually increases costs for lots of families. It's those local facilities that the smaller organizations are able to utilize to increase accessibility and affordability. So how do you guys think about what are the opportunities for some of these funds to be used in the facility space, give people more areas to play, more surfaces to play on, and ultimately just enables like more of that local participation in communities underserved or otherwise?
Ultimately, I think the facilities are one area where this funding can go, but this is not a facilities bill. There are other bills and other grant programs that are very focused on facilities, whether it's the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Program, or there's another bill called the Youth Sports Facilities Act that would kind of unlock economic development dollars towards youth sports facilities. So the $50,000, at the sub grant level, up to $50,000, is not going to build a massive facility, but what it can do is allow for lighting to be, put in place. It can be used for resurfacing or for ADA compliance, for storage. It could be used for rentals, field rentals for these organizations as well. And in many cases, organizations have to put up their own funding to do kind of a municipal match as well. So it could be used towards that to kind of have a multiplier effect. So I think at the local level, there will be more opportunities for refurbished and enhanced play spaces. But ultimately, this isn't going to lead to any kind of mega facilities or complexes or anything.
One thing, Kyle, though, I think it's a great question. Like, if you think about, and we've looked at this systematically, you have a program delivery challenge and the need to resource that. And a lot of that was about what this is about. It's getting to the people that are delivering programs and getting them the resources from their lens to be able to do that. There is definitely a question of the infrastructure that we have where kids are playing and how to address that. And there are different mechanisms for that. As Jared was mentioning, there's existing pots of money. In a lot of ways, to your point, sometimes those dollars get allocated in ways that are tied to economic development, not just about community development. There is definitely room for innovation, and we've been engaged in those conversations as well. How do you incent the development or conversion of spaces that are more accessible, especially in lower income areas where you've seen this happen from a real estate perspective, where they've incentivized that? Could that apply to facility development? How do you strengthen the park and rec system and the accessibility of those spaces as well? So we're not saying that this bill solves all of those issues. What we do believe is it makes a huge impact in helping the program delivery providers and impacting them. Part of the reason we exist as a coalition, part of the reason we exist to do the work that we're doing, is to try to think about what are the other thoughtful ways that we could attack some of those issues. But this, to me, is a no-brainer because it's a mechanism you see around the world. We've seen it work in 6 different states. So now it's just a question of the federal government catching up and being able to solve and address this as an issue, in addition to the opportunities that I think exist to be able to address some of those other issues. And this creates a precedent for this kind of bipartisan kind of collaboration by which to have this kind of impact.
Pete, TeamSnap's pretty heavily used among rec organizations. I've written a few times. I've told you, like, we're in a TeamSnap town, right? So what do you hear from, your customers as the biggest needs where you could see, these grants potentially making an impact? Like, what are some things that really jump out to you that the funds could and would be used for?
Yeah, Kyle, look, I mean, I think we keep hitting it, right? It does definitely vary by region, by type of organization. The needs of a little league at a local community level are probably vastly different than what we're identifying at a grassroots level with the NRPA. I will say generally, I think post COVID, and as we all know, the stats just accelerated this consolidation of operators and sports organizations, and really starts to minimize the impact that local church leagues are having, local nonprofits are having. And so, how do we provide funding back to the grassroots T-ball organization that I came up through, and was kind of fell in love with the game at that point, right? Unfortunately, there's areas where those organizations no longer exist. And if they do over exist, they're probably oversubscribed. They have a shortage of volunteer coaches. They have a shortage of referees. They potentially have a shortage of fields to be able to play on. And so, how do we continue to focus on kind of that early on feeder mechanism, and then the continued investment that needs to happen in order to allow kids that don't want to play in an elite club or going to go down, the for-profit path, the option to play throughout the course of their childhood.
The getting back to the bill for a second, the bill it requires every eligible org to provide a local org to prioritize youth with limited resources, which clearly reflects the goal of expanding access for underserved children, as you guys have mentioned multiple times on this episode. But the bill doesn't define that term. Like, how do you envision HHS defining youth with limited resources? Should it be based on your household income, maybe the federal poverty level, geographic needs? I think one of you guys mentioned that before, or maybe some other standards. How do you look at that?
Yeah, so there are some definitions at the federal level for this, and often they kind of get classified into low income census tracts. So I believe in the bill there is a specific reference to previous legislation around what constitutes a low income community. Ultimately, though, as you kind of referenced, the HHS is going to write eligibility and requirements for the national and regional grants, and provide technical assistance and advise on how those grantees will write the eligibility and requirements for the sub-grantees. So we'll continue to work with them and provide advice. I know that folks from within HHS, like the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, ODPHP, the ones that have kind of owned and written the National Youth Sports Strategy, have a perspective on this as well. So I expect that they'll kind of utilize existing structures for what that constitutes and what those definitions are, and adhere to those.
And just one more for you. You're just picking apart the run youth sports programs language of the bill. Was that it was a little bit undefined? Was that intentional to give HHS flexibility? I know you did talk about a little bit of the national nonprofits that will be giving out these sub grants, but like, for example, should nonprofits that train coaches or conduct research or maybe be advocates for youth sports, would they be eligible to receive these grants or these sub grants? And even if like you don't directly organize leagues or maybe competitions?
So there would be some mechanisms, probably for the national and the regional grants for those types of organizations that provide services to be able to then subgrant to other organizations. But ultimately, the layer that we're most concerned about and focused on is the funding getting to those grassroots organizations that are actually running sports, youth sports in those communities. So also some of this is maybe subject to how this bill gets marked up and changed throughout the course of the process from here to hopeful eventual passage. But certainly, I think there is a place for organizations that are doing the tangential important work, but not running programs themselves, somewhere within this ecosystem to be able to participate. But again, at the grassroots level, the organizations that are sub-grantees need to be able to show that they are running youth sports programs and providing access for kids.
What kind of, I imagine you guys expect a pretty good reception. As you said, it's bipartisan, right? So what are maybe in your view, some of the hurdles to getting it passed, with minimal markup and kind of coming out roughly what it went in like. And assuming the reception is good, what do you see as opportunities to go further? Right. Right now it's based on the sports betting excise tax. And, I was in that space for a little while. There's probably a little bit of regulatory concern in sports betting. Prediction markets are kind of coming for their lunch. So like, the growth of that space, could be minimal at this point. Are there other like, I call them vice dollars. I know that's not the appropriate term, but are there other things to tap into if this is well received? Say, hey, maybe we can replicate that model with this source of funding and go beyond, what's currently proposed.
One thing maybe just to take the Kyle is that if we just start with the assumption there's not enough resources that are going into youth sports, given the outcomes that it can drive, sometimes it's a victim of its own success because you have these things that are, it's an education program or it's a health and wellness program or it's addressing youth recidivism, juvenile crime, whatever it may be. You can actually look at youth sports and see all kinds of indicators that are relevant to those broad outcomes, but it hasn't necessarily fit in a specific bucket. And so in a perfect world, there's a decision about not just by government, but by private philanthropy, which you're seeing more and more of, that are investing in this, that recognize that this is a worthy place to invest dollars because of the leverage of those dollars in transforming lives and community. The reality though in government is if you're trying to get money, if you find a place to fund it, it becomes a lot easier than it is just a straight appropriation that has its own implications. And so certainly I think the idea that there's a funding mechanism that is connected to sports, that is common, that is used very, very, very much across the world and also in this country made sense from a starting point. But we ultimately believe that if with our advocacy, by elevating the right voices, that everyone starts to realize, wow, youth sports is something that can have such a big impact on kids' lives, that this is a place that we should be investing more of our dollars. That doesn't necessarily have to have specific funding mechanisms, but that is something that is a core part of the investment that we're making, out of Health and Human Services or out of the Education Department. But that's always a harder place to start. And so our belief is that by getting this success, it signals to both the public and private sector the worthiness of this kind of investment. And that opens up all kinds of other opportunities to address maybe some of the other market gaps that exist.
Almost like you're pulling from, to your point, pulling from education, health, economic development. Like it touches all these areas. Youth sports is almost more of a theme than any one specific sector, I guess.
Yeah, and you can imagine, I remember early on sitting on some meetings with some of the education groups, and all of a sudden we're saying, hey, well, youth sports should be part of the eligibility for some of the funding pockets that are there. They're looking at us as saying, there's not enough money going in education already. So like you're coming in to take that pie. Well, if you're in a position to grow the pie, then it becomes a lot easier to say, wow, these are incremental dollars that could be invested. And I think really establishing the voice of youth sports at the table, there was no voice. Like outside of the YMCA, who's been really carrying a lot of this conversation, there wasn't a place where the youth sports industry was trying to speak, and those voices were being heard. And I think that's what we've been trying to elevate over years, that I think allows us to make sure that this is getting resources in the right way, and attack questions about not just program delivery, but play spaces and whatnot. And so this to us is a starting point, just like starting with our first state in New York is a starting point that's now allowed us to kind of replicate that to the tune of about $60 million so far that's been unlocked.
Pete, maybe I'll throw this one. You could start, and just a couple more for me. I know we're getting close to time, and I don't want to make this a Monday morning quarterback on Let Kids Play, but that one's made the most headlines recently, and obviously this has been in the works for a long time before that. But that one in particular is currently written, targets, kind of both TeamSnap and LeagueApps being backed by private equity, right? And there's been pretty swift industry pushback, on that bill is currently constructed. So that's probably not what ultimately gets passed. But do you think there's room for regulation in youth sports, that would try to clarify some rules? Forget about the capital structure for a second, but like, does this group here, beyond funding, is there opportunities for like meaningful, quality, useful regulation that would help the industry and, maybe not target specific capital groups?
Yeah, Kyle, I think you're hitting on two things there. Like one, the Let Kids Play Act, it's your point, right? It's a separate lane. They're trying to solve for a different perceived problem, right? Around ownership, cap structure, questionable business practices. That's not what this is, right? This is about funding access, full stop. And I think if you look at the support for this bill being bipartisan, being a combination of the nation's who's who of nonprofits associated with sport, all the way through industry partners, and the warm receptions is already receiving, I think that in of itself is a bit of a telltale of like, we want to hear from the community. And we feel like for the last 6 years, we've been working closely collectively in this coalition to determine what is the best means to impact the affordability and accessibility challenge quickly, right? And so large governance changes, structural changes, whether that being driven by national governing bodies, USOPC, that takes a while to run through the system, right? And that time in order to make those changes, yes, I believe there's areas for improvement across the board, but that's going to take time till it impacts a 6-year-old in some community that doesn't have access to play sport. And right now we're going after a much more, what we believe is an accelerated path to help solve that problem, while the more systemic challenges that exist within the United States youth sport landscape continue to evolve and continue to improve.
Jarrett, maybe end with you. Kind of what are the next steps here? Like what does markup look like? What do the timelines look like? As Pete said, it's probably a quicker route if this gets passed to get funding and increase accessibility and affordability. So maybe we'll sort of end.
Yeah. So this was ultimately referred to the Committee on Education and Workforce. We initially were of the belief that energy and commerce would be heavily involved. They got the secondary referral. We've seen the education and workforce take an interest in youth sports, and they just recently did a markup of a number of bills just last week. And so they have a cadence of marking up bills. We'd like to get on that calendar and have this bill talked about within the committee and have members of both parties improving it and finding ways to make it stronger. Ultimately, there will need to be, a Senate companion. These are things that we're already talking about and working on. So there's a process that we're going to push through. We want to move quickly. We also recognize that the calendar is not necessarily our friend, as they're in an August recess right now. It's July, but they're in recess. There's midterm elections coming up, and then there's this period of a couple months before Congress, kind of switches over in 2027 to a new Congress. So we want to move quickly, and we're gonna, do our best to get on the radar right away so that we can do so.
It's amazing what a bipartisan kind of topic this is, just from our coverage of it and reading about it and the things that are getting proposed. Like you'd be hard. A lot of times I think it'd be hard to identify party lines on some of these things, which is probably a good thing. Lots of interesting ideas, but anything else to add? Anything we missed you guys want to touch on before we go?
One thing I'll add is that sometimes I think we make these assumptions. Well, you mentioned this from a bipartisan lane about, well, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you believe this or that. When in reality, in this case, I think there's a lot of folks that can look at this and see the logic and agree to it. I think the same thing is true of youth sports. We'll get in these labels of what investment firms or nonprofits and for-profits. In reality, I think the way we divide things should look a little bit different. Like who's focused on trying to make youth sports better, who recognize that it can be better, and what are they going to do about it, versus the people that are like content for how it is today. And I think if we took that lens, it doesn't matter what their tax status is, doesn't matter their focus, whether they're national, local. I think there's an idea of bringing people together that say, hey, there's an opportunity to make youth sports even better. Let's have like-minded people work together and leverage their respective talents, abilities, resources, and perspectives to go do that. And I think that's what this bill represents. That's what years of collaboration alongside Pete and others, and certainly with Jared's leadership, I think represents as well. And so we invite anybody that ultimately wants to be part of figuring out how to make youth sports better and work together and collaboratively. We see there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I'd say with that, like the invitation to join the coalition, to, join arms with all of us and trying to make this better, like that door is always open, right? There's a lot of work to be done right now. And doing this through partnership, we find right now we're making the best progress and, welcome others to join.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you guys coming on. We haven't had this many tech heavy hitters since I think April on a show or on a platform. So we appreciate it. I can't wait for this visual. We post this.
Couple of two-time guests. Jarrett, welcome. First time.
Yep.
Thank you.
First time we really appreciate it. There you go. So we appreciate you guys coming on. We really look forward to seeing how the bill progresses and everything. And good luck.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the continued balanced coverage.